The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Bradley as recruits shuffled toward the mess hall, their boots creating a symphony of scrapes and thuds on the concrete. Among them walked Sarah Chen. Her slight frame almost lost in the oversized military fatigues that seemed to swallow her whole. At 5'2" and barely weighing 110 pounds, she looked more like someone who had wandered into the wrong place than a future soldier. The other recruits towered over her, their broad shoulders and confident strides marking them as the kind of people who had been preparing for military service their entire lives. There was Marcus Thompson, a former high school football star whose neck was thicker than Sarah's waist. Jessica Rodriguez had been a competitive swimmer and carried herself with the easy grace of an athlete. Even quiet David Kim had spent years in martial arts and moved with controlled precision. Sarah had none of these advantages. She had grown up in a small apartment above her grandmother's bakery, spending her teenage years mixing dough and serving customers rather than lifting weights or running track. Her hands were soft from kneading bread, not calloused from pull-ups. Her idea of physical challenge had been carrying 50-pound bags of flour up 2 flights of stairs. When she announced her intention to join the military, her family had been bewildered. Her grandmother had clutched her chest dramatically and declared that the army would break her like a twig. Her mother had spent weeks trying to convince her to consider secretarial school instead. Even her best friend had suggested she might be better suited for a nice office job where she could use her gentle nature to help people in a different way. But Sarah had been determined. Something deep inside her had always yearned for something more than the quiet predictability of civilian life. She wanted to prove that she was capable of more than anyone imagined, including herself. She wanted to serve her country and find out what she was truly made of when pushed to her absolute limits. The first week of basic training had been brutal. While other recruits grumbled about the early wake-up calls and demanding schedule, Sarah struggled with the most basic requirements.
During their first physical training session, she had barely managed a single push-up, while others knocked out 20 or 30 with relative ease. Her runtime was embarrassingly slow, and she had needed help just to climb over the lowest obstacles on the confidence course.
Drill Sergeant Martinez had noticed her struggles immediately. Unlike some instructors who might have shown sympathy or offered encouragement, Martinez believed in the harsh medicine of public accountability. During formation that first week, he had called Sarah to the front of the group and used her as an example of what not to be.
"Look at Chen here," he had barked, his voice echoing across the training ground.
This is what happens when someone who should be baking cookies thinks she can play soldier. Some of you might think the army has gotten soft, that we let anyone in these days.
Chen here is living proof that some people just aren't cut out for this life. The words had stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She could feel the eyes of her fellow recruits boring into her back, some filled with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. A few looked genuinely embarrassed on her behalf. But rather than breaking her spirit, the public humiliation had ignited something fierce and stubborn in her chest.
That night in the barracks, as other recruits whispered among themselves or wrote letters home, Sarah had lain in her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling.
The springs creaked with every movement, and she could hear David Kim snoring softly in the bed across from hers.
Her body ached in ways she had never experienced, and she knew tomorrow would bring more of the same challenges that had defeated her today.
Some recruits had already started dropping out. Johnson from Texas had quit after 3 days, claiming he needed to help his family with their farm.
Williams from Ohio had been medically discharged after injuring her knee during an obstacle course.
Sarah understood the temptation to give up, to admit that maybe everyone had been right about her limitations.
Instead, she had rolled out of bed and dropped to the floor. In the dim light filtering through the barracks windows, she had attempted her first push-up of the evening. Her arms had shaken with effort, and she had barely managed to lower herself halfway before collapsing. But she had tried again and again. By the time she finally fell asleep, she had managed 3 complete push-ups, her arms burning and sweat pooling on the floor beneath her. The next few weeks had fallen into a pattern of struggle and incremental improvement. While other recruits complained about the food, the schedule, and the constant pressure, Sarah had focused entirely on surviving each day. She had discovered that her small size, while a disadvantage in most physical challenges, gave her certain advantages in others. She could crawl through spaces that gave larger recruits trouble, and her low center of gravity made her surprisingly stable during balance exercises. More importantly, her background in the bakery had given her an unexpected edge in terms of work ethic and attention to detail. While other recruits grumbled about cleaning duties or complained about the repetitive nature of certain tasks, Sarah had approached everything with the same methodical patience she had once used to ice wedding cakes or count inventory. She had also discovered that she had an unusual tolerance for discomfort and criticism. Years of dealing with difficult customers and working long hours in a hot kitchen had built up her mental resilience in ways she hadn't recognized. When Drill Sergeant Martinez singled her out for criticism, she absorbed it without breaking. When other recruits made jokes about her size or performance, she responded with quiet determination rather than anger or tears. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things had begun to change. Her run times had improved from embarrassing to merely slow. Her push-ups had increased from 0 to 5 to 10. She still struggled with pull-ups and remained the weakest recruit in terms of raw physical strength, but she was no longer completely hopeless. Other recruits had begun to notice her persistence. Marcus, despite his imposing size, had started offering quiet words of encouragement when the drill sergeants weren't listening. Jessica had begun sharing tips from her athletic background, showing Sarah more efficient running techniques and breathing patterns. Even some of the recruits who had initially dismissed her had developed a grudging respect for her refusal to quit. But Drill Sergeant Martinez had remained unimpressed. If anything, her gradual improvement seemed to annoy him more than her initial failures. During one particularly challenging training session, he had pulled her aside after she had successfully completed an obstacle that had defeated her the previous week. "Don't think you're fooling anyone, Chen," he had said, his voice low enough that other recruits couldn't hear. "You might be getting marginally less pathetic, but that doesn't make you a soldier. This isn't about participation trophies or feel-good stories. When bullets start flying, your platoon needs to know they can count on you. Right now, you'd be a liability that could get people killed."
He says it's an enormous thing.
His words had hit harder than any of his public criticisms. The possibility that her limitations might endanger others was something she hadn't fully considered. That night, she had written a long letter to her grandmother describing her struggles and doubts. She had sealed the letter but never sent it, instead keeping it in her footlocker as a reminder of the choice she faced every morning: keep fighting or go home. As the weeks progressed, Sarah had noticed that basic training was as much about mental toughness as physical capability. Recruits who had seemed like natural soldiers had cracked under the constant pressure and unpredictability. Others who had appeared weak or unsuitable had found reserves of strength they hadn't known existed. The training had become progressively more challenging. Simple obstacle courses had given way to complex tactical exercises. Individual challenges had evolved into team-based problems that required coordination and trust. The drill sergeants had introduced sleep deprivation, time pressure, and increasingly realistic combat simulations designed to test every recruit's breaking point. Through it all, Sarah had continued her private campaign of self-improvement. She had used every spare moment to practice skills that came easily to others. While other recruits relaxed or socialized during breaks, she could be found practicing knots, reviewing military protocols, or attempting to do just one more pull-up. Her persistence had begun to pay dividends in unexpected ways. While she remained physically weaker than most of her peers, she had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of military procedures and regulations. Her attention to detail, honed through years of precise baking measurements, had made her invaluable during equipment inspections and administrative tasks. More surprisingly, during team exercises, her suggestions were increasingly sought out by other recruits who had learned to respect her analytical mind, even if they still doubted her physical capabilities.
The transformation hadn't gone entirely unnoticed by the training staff.
Sergeant Williams, one of the assistant instructors, had begun watching Sarah with interest. Unlike Martinez, Williams seemed to appreciate the subtle forms of strength that couldn't be measured in push-ups or run times. She had started giving Sarah additional responsibilities and more complex challenges, as if testing the limits of her mental resilience. But the ultimate test was still approaching. Every recruit knew that basic training would culminate in a final field exercise that would determine who earned the right to continue their military career. The details were kept secret, but rumors circulated constantly about the brutal challenges that awaited them. As Sarah prepared for sleep on what would be one of her last nights in the basic training barracks, she reflected on how much had changed since that first humiliating day when Drill Sergeant Martinez had used her as an example of weakness. She was still the smallest recruit in the platoon, still struggled with many physical challenges, and still faced constant doubts from her instructors and peers. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. The frightened girl who had arrived at Camp Bradley had been replaced by someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more determined. She might not be the strongest or fastest recruit, but she had developed something equally valuable: an unbreakable will and a strategic mind that could find solutions where others saw only obstacles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and eventually, the final test that would determine her fate. As she closed her eyes and listened to the familiar sounds of the barracks settling into night, Sarah Chin felt ready for whatever lay ahead. She had spent weeks proving to herself that she was stronger than anyone had believed possible. Soon, she would have the chance to prove it to everyone else as well. The announcement came on a gray Tuesday morning that felt heavy with anticipation. Drill Sergeant Martinez stood before the assembled platoon, his weathered face revealing nothing as he held a clipboard that would determine their immediate futures. The recruits stood at attention, but Sarah could sense the nervous energy radiating from her fellow soldiers despite their rigid postures. "Listen up, maggots," Martinez began, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Your final evaluation starts tomorrow at 0400 hours. This isn't going to be like the practice runs you've been stumbling through. This is a comprehensive field exercise that will test everything you think you've learned over the past 12 weeks. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. Around her, she could see other recruits swallowing hard or shifting their weight nervously. Even Marcus, who had sailed through most of the training with apparent ease, looked tense. "The exercise will last 72 hours, Martinez continued, consulting his clipboard with deliberate slowness. "You'll be operating in teams of 8, facing scenarios designed to push you beyond your comfort zones. Navigation, combat simulations, survival skills, medical emergencies, leadership challenges, and team coordination under extreme stress. Some of you will discover you have what it takes to be soldiers. Others will learn they should have stayed home." His eyes swept across the formation, lingering on Sarah just long enough to make his meaning clear. She had endured weeks of his skeptical looks and cutting remarks, but now she felt something different in his gaze. It wasn't quite respect, but it wasn't complete dismissal either. It was more like curious doubt, as if you were genuinely uncertain about what she might do when truly tested. "Team assignments will be posted this afternoon," Martinez announced. "Use the rest of today to prepare your gear and your minds. Tomorrow morning we separate the soldiers from the civilians."
As the formation dismissed, Sarah found herself walking alongside David Kim, who had become something of an ally over the past few weeks.
His quiet intensity reminded her of herself, and they had developed an understanding based on mutual respect rather than easy friendship. "Nervous?" David asked quietly as they headed toward the barracks. "Terrified," Sarah admitted, then immediately regretted the honesty. But David nodded thoughtfully rather than looking surprised. "Good," he said. "Means you're taking it seriously. Half these people are acting like it's going to be a camping trip with some extra push-ups." Sarah glanced around at their fellow recruits, noting the mix of bravado and anxiety in their conversations. Some were already speculating about which teams they hoped to join, while others discussed strategies for the challenges they expected to face. She realized that David was right. Many of them were treating this like an extension of the training they had already completed rather than the ultimate test it was designed to be. That afternoon, the team assignments appeared on the bulletin board like a verdict from on high. Sarah pushed through the crowd of recruits to find her name, her heart pounding as she scanned the lists. When she finally found it, she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Team Charlie consisted of 8 recruits who represented a cross-section of the entire platoon. There was Marcus Thompson, whose physical strength had made him a natural leader in many exercises. Jessica Rodriguez brought athletic ability and competitive fire. David Kim offered tactical thinking and steady nerves. Rebecca Martinez contributed mechanical aptitude and problem-solving skills. Tony Williams had proven himself excellent at navigation and outdoor skills. Lisa Chang possessed medical training from her civilian background as a nursing student. James Foster had emerged as someone who could keep morale up during difficult challenges. And then there was Sarah, the recruit who still couldn't do more than 15 push-ups and whose run times remained in the bottom quarter of the platoon. As she studied the list of her teammates, she wondered what role she was supposed to play in this group of capable soldiers. The answer came during their first team meeting that evening. Marcus, who everyone expected would emerge as the team leader, surprised them by suggesting they rotate leadership responsibilities based on the specific challenges they faced. "Look," he said, addressing the group that had gathered in a quiet corner of the recreation area, "we all have different strengths. I might be good at the physical stuff, but I'm not the best at planning or problem-solving under pressure. We should use whoever's skills match what we're dealing with." "That makes sense," Jessica agreed. "But who decides who leads when?" "Maybe we should figure out what each person's best at," David suggested. "Then we can make decisions based on the situation we're facing."
As the team went around the circle discussing their strengths and experiences, Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable.
Marcus talked about his football experience and natural physical strength. Jessica described her swimming background and competitive mindset. David outlined his martial arts training and strategic thinking abilities. Each person seemed to have clear, obvious qualifications that would be valuable during the field exercise. When the attention turned to her, Sarah felt 8 pairs of eyes waiting for her to justify her presence on the team. The silence stretched uncomfortably as she tried to think of what unique contribution she could offer. "I'm good at details," she finally said, immediately feeling foolish for such a weak response. "And I don't give up easily."
Details like what? Rebecca asked, not unkindly, but clearly looking for something more concrete.
Sarah thought about the skills she had developed during her weeks of struggle and gradual improvement. Equipment maintenance, regulations, procedures, things other people might overlook when they're under pressure. "And I'm good at seeing solutions that aren't obvious,"
Like what?
Tony pressed. Sarah recalled a team exercise from the previous week when their squad had been tasked with crossing a simulated minefield. While other teams had focused on finding the quickest or most direct route, Sarah had suggested they move their equipment first, then use the safe path they had established to cross as a group. It had taken longer than some approaches, but they had been the only team to complete the exercise without any simulated casualties. As she described this example, she saw nods of recognition from her teammates. She realized that several of them had noticed her contributions during previous exercises, even if they hadn't always been the most dramatic or obvious ones. "Okay," Marcus said after she finished. "So you're our detail person and backup problem solver." "That works." The conversation moved on to planning and preparation, but Sarah found herself thinking about the label that had just been assigned to her. Backup problem solver. It wasn't exactly inspiring, but it was more recognition than she had received in weeks. At least her teammates saw her as potentially useful rather than simply dead weight. Over the next 24 hours, Team Charlie threw themselves into preparation with the intensity of soldiers heading into actual combat. They studied maps of the training area, reviewed their equipment lists multiple times, and practiced scenarios they thought might appear during the exercise. Sarah contributed by creating detailed checklists and contingency plans, organizing their gear for maximum efficiency, and researching regulations that might apply to unusual situations. As the night before the exercise wore on, Sarah found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay in her bunk listening to the sounds of the barracks and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. In less than 6 hours, she would face the ultimate test of whether she belonged in the military or should return home to her grandmother's bakery. Part of her wondered if maybe everyone had been right from the beginning. Maybe she really was too small, too weak, and too inexperienced for this life. Maybe all her gradual improvements and small victories had been meaningless in the face of the real challenges ahead. But as these doubts circled through her mind, she also thought about how much she had already overcome. The girl who had arrived at Camp Bradley 3 months ago couldn't have imagined surviving even the first week of training. Now she was preparing for a final challenge that would test everything she had learned and everything she had become. She thought about her teammates and their willingness to give her a role in their success. She thought about David's quiet confidence in her abilities and Rebecca's patient explanations of mechanical principles. She even thought about Marcus's surprising recognition that leadership should be based on situation rather than size or obvious strength. Most of all, she thought about Drill Sergeant Martinez and his consistent message that she didn't belong here. Tomorrow would be her chance to prove him wrong, not through dramatic gestures or sudden transformations, but through the same steady persistence and attention to detail that had carried her this far. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the barracks windows, Sarah finally drifted off to sleep. Her dreams were filled with obstacle courses and tactical problems, but also with images of her grandmother's proud face and the smell of fresh bread rising in the oven. When the wake-up call came at 03:30, she was ready. The final test was about to begin, and Sarah Chen had never been more prepared for a challenge in her life. The transport truck rumbled through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying Team Charlie and 3 other squads toward the training area that would serve as their testing ground for the next 3 days. Sarah sat wedged between David and Rebecca, her gear packed according to the detailed lists she had spent hours perfecting. Around her, the other teams maintained various levels of nervous chatter or focused silence. Through the canvas cover of the truck, she could see the first pale hints of sunrise beginning to outline the horizon. In a few hours, they would be deep in the field exercise that would determine whether she had truly earned her place as a soldier or had simply been carried along by the momentum of training. When the truck finally stopped, Drill Sergeant Martinez and 2 other instructors were waiting for them in a cleared area surrounded by dense forest. The teams filed out and formed up in their designated groups, equipment at the ready and faces set with determination. "Welcome to your final examination," Martinez announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembled recruits. "Over the next 70 days word time, 2 hours, you will face 12 different challenges designed to test your military readiness. Some challenges will be individual, others will require team coordination. All of them will push you beyond anything you've experienced during training.
He gestured toward a series of sealed envelopes laid out on a table behind him.
Each team will receive their first mission packet now. Inside, you'll find a map, objectives, time constraints, and special requirements. The clock starts the moment you open that envelope, and it doesn't stop until this exercise is complete. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as Marcus stepped forward to collect Team Charlie's envelope. The weight of the next 3 days seemed to settle on her shoulders like a heavy pack, but she also felt a strange sense of calm. All the preparation and training had led to this moment, and she was as ready as she would ever be. One final note, Martinez continued, his eyes sweeping across the teams. This exercise is pass or fail. There are no participation awards and no credit for good intentions. Either you demonstrate the skills and character necessary to serve your country, or you go home. The choice is entirely up to you. With that sobering reminder, he stepped back and gave the signal to begin. Marcus tore open Team Charlie's envelope with steady hands, and the 8 recruits huddled around as he read their first mission aloud.
Navigate to Checkpoint Alpha using only map and compass.
Time limit, 4 hours. Upon arrival, establish communication with base station and await further instructions. Warning: enemy patrol activity reported in Sector 7. Maintain operational security at all times. Tony immediately spread out the topographical map while Sarah consulted her compass and began calculating distances and terrain features. The checkpoint was approximately 8 kilometers away, but the route would take them through varied terrain, including steep hills, dense forest, and at least one river crossing.
If we maintain a steady pace and avoid the obvious trails, we should reach Alpha with time to spare, Tony said, tracing a potential route with his finger.
Wait, Sarah said, studying the map more carefully. Look at these contour lines near the river. If there's been any rain recently, that crossing point might be treacherous. We should plan an alternate route that adds distance but reduces risk. David nodded approvingly. Good catch. What about enemy patrol activity in Sector 7? Sarah consulted the map again, comparing their planned route with the designated sectors.
Our direct route cuts through the edge of Sector 7.
We could avoid it entirely by going around to the north, but that adds almost 2 kilometers. Or we could move through it carefully and save time, Jessica suggested. It's just a training exercise, right?
But the instructions emphasize operational security, Rebecca pointed out. Maybe they're really going to have instructors out there playing enemy patrols.
Marcus listened to the discussion for a moment, then made the decision. We go with Sarah's alternate route for the river crossing, but we risk Sector 7 to save time. If we encounter any enemy activity, we'll deal with it as a team. The team shouldered their packs and began moving out, with Tony taking point for navigation and Sarah keeping a detailed log of their progress and any significant observations. The early morning forest was quiet except for the sounds of their careful movement through the undergrowth. For the first 2 hours, everything went according to plan. They made good time across relatively open terrain, their formation staying tight and their noise discipline excellent. Sarah found herself impressed by how well the team worked together, each person contributing their strengths without stepping on anyone else's responsibilities. The first real test came when they reached the river crossing Sarah had identified on the map. The water was higher than expected, running fast and cold from recent mountain storms. The obvious crossing point showed signs of erosion and looked potentially dangerous for a team carrying full packs.
Your alternate crossing? Marcus asked, looking to Sarah. She consulted her map and compass, then pointed upstream to where the river curved around a rocky outcropping.
About 300 meters up, the water should be shallower there, and we'll have better visibility of the opposite bank. The detour cost them 20 minutes, but Sarah's assessment proved accurate. The alternate crossing was not only safer, but allowed them to approach the far bank with better concealment. As they prepared to cross, David spotted something that made everyone freeze. "Movement," he whispered, pointing toward the tree line on the opposite side. 2 figures in camouflage, maybe 50 meters south of where we would have crossed at the original point. Through careful observation, they confirmed that 2 instructors were indeed positioned to observe the obvious crossing point, presumably to test how teams would handle unexpected enemy contact. By taking Sarah's suggested alternate route, Team Charlie had avoided what could have been a significant complication.
Nice work, Marcus said quietly as they completed their crossing undetected.
Your detail-oriented approach just saved us time and trouble.
Sarah felt a glow of satisfaction, but she also recognized that this was just the first of many challenges ahead. The river crossing had been a test of planning and navigation, but she knew the exercises would become progressively more difficult and diverse. The approach to Checkpoint Alpha confirmed this suspicion. As they moved through the final kilometer, they encountered multiple obstacles that seemed designed to test different aspects of their training. A simulated minefield required careful route planning and teamwork. A series of natural obstacles demanded physical strength and coordination. A communications challenge tested their technical skills and ability to work under pressure. Through each challenge, Sarah found opportunities to contribute in ways that complemented her teammates' abilities. When Marcus struggled with the technical aspects of radio operation, she was able to quickly identify and correct frequency settings. When the team needed to move heavy equipment across difficult terrain, her small size allowed her to scout ahead and identify the most efficient route. Most importantly, she began to notice that her constant attention to procedures and regulations was proving valuable in unexpected ways. When other teams might overlook safety requirements or skip steps to save time, Sarah's checklists and systematic approach helped Team Charlie complete tasks correctly the first time, ultimately saving them time and avoiding penalties. By the time they reached Checkpoint Alpha, the team was functioning like a well-oiled machine. Each person knew their role and trusted their teammates to handle their responsibilities. The initial skepticism about Sarah's contributions had been replaced by genuine appreciation for the unique perspective she brought to problem-solving. Their communication with the base station went smoothly, and they received their second mission packet with confidence. But as Marcus read the new instructions aloud, Sarah realized that their first success had been just the beginning. Team Charlie will proceed to Objective Bravo for urban warfare simulation. Time limit, 6 hours. Mission parameters: secure designated building, extract simulated hostage, neutralize opposition forces. Special requirements: team must operate with reduced communications and limited ammunition. Medical casualties possible? The complexity and intensity had just increased dramatically. Urban warfare required different skills than forest navigation, and the mention of medical casualties suggested that the exercise designers were prepared to test every aspect of their training.
As the team studied their new map and began planning their approach, Sarah realized that her role was evolving.
She was no longer just the detail-oriented backup problem solver. She was becoming an integral part of a team that had learned to value her contributions as much as anyone else's. The real test, however, was still to come. The challenges were becoming more complex, more dangerous, and more realistic. Soon, she would discover whether all her preparation and gradual improvement had truly transformed her into the soldier she desperately wanted to become. The second day of the exercise was about to begin, and Team Charlie was ready for whatever lay ahead. The third day of the field exercise dawned gray and misty, with the kind of persistent drizzle that soaked through everything and made every task more difficult. Team Charlie had successfully completed 8 of their 12 challenges, but Sarah could see the exhaustion beginning to wear on everyone. Faces were drawn with fatigue, uniforms were stained with mud and sweat, and the easy camaraderie of the first day had given way to focused determination tinged with anxiety. They had lost Lisa Chang during the urban warfare simulation, when she had been declared a medical casualty after falling from a second-story window during their hostage extraction. The team had completed the mission successfully, but operating with 7 members instead of 8 had forced everyone to stretch beyond their comfort zones. More concerning was the gradual attrition they had observed in other teams. Team Alpha had lost 2 members to injuries, 1 real and 1 simulated. Team Delta had been reduced to 5 members after 3 recruits had been eliminated for failure to meet minimum standards on technical challenges.
Even Team Bravo, which had seemed like the strongest group at the beginning, was showing signs of strain and internal conflict.
Sarah sat with her back against a tree, methodically cleaning her rifle, while the rest of Team Charlie prepared for their next mission briefing.
Over the past 60 hours, something fundamental had shifted in how her teammates viewed her and how she saw herself. The gradual respect she had earned through consistent performance had evolved into something stronger: genuine trust and reliance. During the night infiltration exercise, when Marcus had become disoriented in the darkness, Sarah's careful attention to compass bearings and terrain features had guided the team safely to their objective.
In the Equipment Maintenance Challenge, her systematic approach had helped them identify and repair critical gear failures that had eliminated other teams.
Most significantly, during yesterday's leadership rotation exercise, the team had unanimously selected her to lead them through a complex logistics problem that had stumped several other groups. The experience of being trusted with leadership, even temporarily, had revealed capabilities Sarah hadn't known she possessed.
Under pressure, her analytical mind had processed multiple variables quickly and effectively. Her attention to detail had prevented costly mistakes.
Most importantly, her hard-won understanding of each teammate's strengths and limitations had allowed her to coordinate their efforts with surprising efficiency. But she also knew that the most challenging test was still ahead. The final exercise was always designed to push the remaining recruits to their absolute limits, separating those who truly belonged in the military from those who had simply managed to survive the training process. Drill Sergeant Martinez appeared through the morning mist like a specter, flanked by the other instructors who had been observing and evaluating their performance throughout the exercise. His face revealed nothing as he surveyed the remaining teams, but Sarah thought she detected something different in his posture, a subtle acknowledgement that these survivors had proven themselves worthy of respect. "Congratulations on making it this far," he began, his voice carrying clearly despite the dampening effect of the fog. "Over the past 60 hours, you have demonstrated many of the qualities we expect from soldiers: teamwork, technical competence, physical endurance, and mental toughness. But the final challenge will test something more fundamental: your ability to perform under conditions of extreme stress, when failure could have life or death consequences."
He gestured toward a series of vehicles that had appeared on the road behind him, their engines running and exhaust visible in the cold morning air.
You will be transported to a scenario that simulates actual combat conditions: multiple objectives, time pressure, equipment failures, casualties, enemy contact, and leadership challenges. Everything you have learned during your training will be tested simultaneously. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she also felt a strange sense of anticipation. After months of gradual improvement and incremental challenges, she was finally going to face the ultimate test of whether she belonged here. "Team assignments for the final exercise will be different," Martinez continued. "Based on performance evaluations, leadership potential, and overall readiness, we are restructuring the groups. When I call your name, board your assigned vehicle." The redistribution that followed was swift and decisive. Many recruits found themselves separated from teammates they had worked with throughout the exercise. This is the book. It's about history. The separation travels on. Some looked confused or anxious as they were assigned to unfamiliar groups. Others appeared relieved to escape teams that had been struggling with internal conflicts. When Sarah heard her name called, she was directed toward a vehicle containing 6 other recruits, only 2 of whom she recognized. Marcus was there, along with David Kim, but the other 4 were from different teams. Looking at their faces, she realized that each person in this group had been identified as a potential leader or high performer. As their vehicle pulled away from the staging area, Sarah found herself wondering whether this assignment represented recognition of her capabilities or simply the instructor's desire to see how she would perform under maximum pressure. Either way, she was committed to giving everything she had to prove that she belonged among these elite survivors. The final scenario was more complex than anything they had experienced during training. Set in a mock village complete with buildings, vehicles, and multiple levels of terrain, it required the team to coordinate simultaneous operations across a wide area. They had to secure strategic positions, extract valuable intelligence, neutralize simulated enemy forces, and evacuate casualties, all while operating under strict time constraints and dealing with equipment that had been deliberately sabotaged to create additional complications. The scenario began with Sarah's team being inserted by helicopter into a landing zone under simulated enemy fire. As they moved toward their primary objectives, they immediately encountered problems that tested every aspect of their training. Communication equipment malfunctioned, forcing them to rely on hand signals and predetermined procedures. One team member was immediately declared a casualty, reducing their operational strength. Time pressure mounted as they discovered that their objectives were more heavily defended than intelligence reports had indicated. In the chaos and confusion of the scenario, Sarah found herself stepping naturally into a leadership role that no one had officially assigned to her. When their communications failed, she improvised a system of visual signals that allowed the team to maintain coordination. When they encountered unexpected obstacles, she quickly developed alternative approaches that maintained mission effectiveness while minimizing risk. Most critically, when David Kim was declared wounded during their assault on the primary objective, Sarah made the split-second decision to modify their entire tactical approach. Rather than pressing forward with the original plan, she directed Marcus and the other physically stronger team members to establish a defensive perimeter while she led a smaller group to complete the intelligence-gathering mission.
Her decision proved crucial when they discovered that the intelligence objective was far more complex than anyone had anticipated.
Instead of simply retrieving documents or equipment, they found themselves faced with a sophisticated puzzle that required careful analysis and systematic problem-solving under extreme time pressure. While explosions simulated enemy artillery and instructors playing opposing forces maintained pressure on their defensive positions, Sarah applied the same methodical approach that had served her throughout training. She organized the available information systematically, identified patterns that others missed, and developed a solution that allowed them to complete their mission with minutes to spare. As the final simulation concluded and the evaluators called for ceasefire, Sarah stood in the middle of the mock battlefield, with smoke still rising from pyrotechnic charges and her uniform torn and muddy. Around her, the other members of her ad hoc team looked exhausted but satisfied. They had completed every aspect of their complex mission, suffered minimal casualties, and demonstrated the kind of coordinated effectiveness that marked truly professional soldiers. But the real validation came an hour later during the final formation when Drill Sergeant Martinez announced the results of the field exercise. Standing before the assembled survivors, he read through the performance evaluations with clinical precision, noting strengths and weaknesses, successful completions and failures. When he reached Sarah's name, his voice took on a different tone, one that she had never heard him use when addressing her directly. "Recruit Chen," he said, making eye contact for the first time since that humiliating first week. "Demonstrated exceptional leadership under pressure, innovative problem-solving capabilities, and the ability to coordinate complex operations effectively."
D's. Well, better than captives' opinions.
Her performance during the final scenario exceeded expectations and serves as an example of the strategic thinking and adaptability we expect from future military leaders. The words seemed to echo in the silence that Sarah felt the eyes of every other recruit upon her, but instead of the skeptical or dismissive looks she had grown accustomed to, she saw respect, admiration, and even amazement.
Later that evening, as the exhausted recruits prepared for their final night in the field, Marcus approached Sarah where she sat cleaning her gear by the light of a small campfire.
"You know," he said, settling down beside her, "when they first put you on our team, I figured you'd be the weak link we'd have to carry through everything." Sarah looked up from her rifle, waiting for him to continue.
I was completely wrong, Marcus admitted.
"You weren't the weak link. You were the secret weapon none of us saw coming." As Sarah reflected on his words, she realized that her journey had never been about becoming strong in the traditional sense that everyone expected. She had discovered a different kind of strength, one based on persistence, intelligence, and the ability to find solutions where others saw only obstacles. 3 months ago, everyone had thought she was too weak to become a soldier. Tomorrow, she would graduate basic training as one of the top performers in her class. Having proven that true strength comes in many forms, the girl who had barely been able to complete a single push-up had become a leader that others looked to in crisis. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came the next morning, when Drill Sergeant Martinez personally handed her the certificate that officially recognized her as a soldier in the United States Army. "Congratulations, Private Chen," he said, and for the first time his voice held genuine respect. "You've earned this." As Sarah took the certificate with steady hands, she thought about everyone who had doubted her, including herself. They had all been wrong about what weakness looked like, and what strength could become when it was forged through determination, tested under pressure, and refined through countless small victories. She was no longer the uncertain girl who had arrived at Camp Bradley hoping to prove herself. She was Private Sarah Chen, a soldier who had discovered that the greatest victories often come not from overwhelming force, but from the quiet courage to keep fighting when everyone expects you to quit.